takes a second for everyone to join on. And we apologize in advance for using Zoom.
That's used to it now.
All right, so we'll get started. People will start to kind of pile in. So Emmanuel, tell us a little bit. We got a lot of interest in this topic. I think our community always wants to hear about projects, and I think complexity and size and of course an enlightened owner, right? So you can have complexity and size on a project, but you may not have an enlightened owner that's interested in doing things that are innovative. So there was a lot of interest, I think, on your project. So if you could just give us a little bit, kind of your background, your role at Microsoft, huge organization. So we all know someone that works at Microsoft, so to speak. So a little bit of background on kind of your role at Microsoft, and we start talking about kind of the project.
Excellent, great. First of all, thank you, KP, for having me here. It's an absolute privilege to be here and to talk about the project. My name is Emmanuel Daniel. I'm part of a team within Microsoft known as the Applied Innovation and Incubation team. And what my basic charter was before I took on is I used to help drive the smart building solution and strategy across Asia and MEA. And my focus was predominantly working with customers to help get their buildings smart, connected, and drive transformative experiences across that space. Now, when we started the Redmond campus modernization a few years ago, that's when Microsoft asked me to move down to Redmond and help drive the transformation of the Redmond campus. But the whole goal being is, how do we create a campus that is sustainable, secure, that focuses on delighting the experience of anybody who comes to the campus. Our campus is pretty large. And if you would have, and the sites, the details, all that has been made public. So it's the East Campus Modernization Project. And I work very closely with our real estate organization who owns the project and manages it and helps set the trend on what digital transformation for Microsoft means. What does experience mean? What are the different types of people that come onto the campus? How does technology fit into it? And it's not just technology for technology's sake. It's about driving engagement of users or anybody that comes into the campus and giving them a delightful experience, leveraging the technology and the platform that we have. That's what I do. So working all the way across the board with general contractors, with suppliers, with device manufacturers, with structured cabling folks, with civil engineers and the architects, both the IT architects and the physical space architects, on defining a space that is able to meet the needs of its occupants is what I'm all about. Very
cool. You know, I say this a lot. I'm very proud of our industry, just in general, right? I'm kind of a nerd that way. Mm-hmm. And I always say we're like the last industry that creates, design, and builds a product. It's of great permanence, right? Our software gets updated every day, every other day. We throw away our laptops every 2 to 3. I mean, like it's the last thing that we design and build and operate of kind of great permanence. Mm-hmm. And it feels like we use the least amount of critical thinking around the user experience, right? I mean, you guys at Microsoft on the other side of the house, so much thought into user experience and customer journey and all those words. And the reality is that product maybe has a shelf life of 2 years.
Right.
Yet we design and build amazing things. We're shaping the planet literally. Mm-hmm. And we put like so little effort into customer journey and user experience. And
right.
So I find it interesting. I mean, how did that idea, it seems like you guys try to really treat it like a product, like how you would treat some new software release or product release.
It's a fantastic point, and it's a point that, so Microsoft is a technology company. We love technology. We believe technology should empower everybody that consumes it and uses it. That's what you're all about. But when it came to buildings don't change every 2 years, right? And with the cloud, our releases have become even more frequent, right? So 2 years is probably a distant future now when you talk about technology. And the challenge we had is we are building a space that's going to last for 20 to 30 years. If a space that's going to last for that long, how do you constantly update the experience that goes into that space? And when you talk to civil engineers, they'll say, hey, look, I'm putting a conduit in. I'm not going to put another conduit because it's going to cost me so much more money and the building will be, out of use. You talk to an interior designer, he's going to say, look, I need to have these panels completely flush with my building. If they stand out, okay, architecturally, aesthetically, this room doesn't work, right? You talk to lighting designers, they give the same thing. And I said, "Yeah, look, I hear all of you, but if you look at the way the industry is changing, the use of space has transformed. Space is not just about coming there, sitting 9 to 5, working and leaving. Space is about collaboration. Space is about engagement. Space is about driving innovative discussions. And for that, space needs to be adaptive or dynamic. How do we collaborate and create a space that is able to dynamically respond to the needs of its participants? And that's where the experience starts to fit in. So what do people want? And when we start looking at people, we then start understanding the old school way of thought, right? You have personas that come to the office, you have different personas, they do this, they do that. And we took a different approach. We said, you know what? It's not about the persona, because today everybody can do anything, literally. So he said, it's about behaviors. What are the types of behaviors that people exhibit when they come to space? And when I'm talking about people, I'm talking about a new joinee who's absolutely pumped, excited to come to Microsoft. I'm talking about a veteran who spent almost his or her entire career at Microsoft, and they still want to come to the office every day invigorated. Yeah, I'm talking about mid-career employees who are still exploring and learning about the campus, the buildings that we have. How do we drive that engagement without having to drill conduits and holes and redo structured cabling every 6 months? And that's where we started baselining on what does it mean to be a connected building? What type of data do we need to transform the experiences that people need to have? How is that data going to be captured? And to capture that data, what does physical space have to contribute to in terms of the location, the position, the power? So we had a discussion today where we started talking with our engineers and saying, how much of power does a building need to collect all the data that we would like to have? Right? And then you talk to electrical engineers, they'll say, guys, okay, I only have these panels and they can only give this much of load. If you're going to add any more devices, it's not going to work. And we said, how do we do that balance? Because cost is a big deal for us. Balancing the needs of the power requirements of a building to ensure we hit our sustainability targets, because that's a big deal for us, while ensuring we're able to place devices, have room for growth of devices that can capture the data to drive engagement across the board is what we look for. And when we say engagement, it's about light, it's about environment, it's about noise, it's about touch points, it's about experiences in the way you consume a service, it's about dynamically reorganizing the room. So depending upon the collaboration style you're in, the room is able to adapt to your needs. And experience for us does not always have to be digital and technology. It can be simple accidental collisions, right? We design space so that if I have something on my mind and I'm looking for someone in the office, how do I ensure my day is planned in a way that I would accidentally bump into that person, right? So encouraging accidental collisions and unplanned conversations is what we're all about. We don't want you to book a 20-person meeting room and do 2 days of planning to come there and to get it just right. No, it's about at that point in time, if you get that spark of creativity in you, how does that space respond by creating the perfect environment, ambience, noise, light, and bringing the people in so they can relax and collaborate comfortably. That's the approach that we took.
That's amazing. I think that's what every owner wants, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yes.
I think that's what they want. I think they struggle to get it, right?
Uh-huh.
And we talk about the battle of CapEx versus OpEx, right?
Yes.
What are the decisions that the CapEx guys make and the gals make that the OpEx people have to live with? That or the OpEx people can be a little less creative. Something like it's just it's the money thing too.
Right.
How give me an example. I mean, give me specific challenges when you started talking about these user experiences where we just can't figure out what these coders want. They just changed. Was there anything where it was just people are a conundrum.
Yes.
You're trying to figure out what people need, which is a big part of it. Were there any specific challenges where you just said, "Oh, I just don't know what to do with these people"?
Mm-hmm. So every day that comes up, and it's a little more challenging for us is because when you look at our Redmond campus, it's an open campus, it's huge. We've got different types of people that do different types of activities. We've got our engineers who we love. We have our sales and marketing folks. We have our real estate folks that help manage and ensure the campus keeps running. Added to that, you have guests, you have visitors, you have students, you have interviewees that come and say, "Hey, I want to work with Microsoft." Now, what we tried to do was we said, given the plethora of the people that come, we added another dimension where we started looking at demographics. So why is demographics important? Depending on the age group, the millennials, the Gen Zs, the Gen Ys, okay, all of them work at Microsoft. Mm-hmm. How do you create a space that works for everyone? And each one has a unique challenges, right? If you look at working parents, their priority is how do I get to the campus in the quickest, shortest possible way after I drop my kids off at school? Or how do I leave the campus so I don't get stuck in the jams that happen so that I can pick my kids up from school on time? Yeah, I've got the millennials who are like, you know what, I want to go and explore and drive inspiration from the surroundings that are there around me. I then have the food junkie, where dining is a big part of their work life, right? I want to go from building to building, try out the cafeterias, taste different types of food. How did we cater for all of these experiences and behaviors that people have was giving them the ability to personalize the experience based on the data that we are collecting, right? If you decide that, hey, you know what, today I don't want to drive to the campus, I would like to use the shuttle connectors that we have, mm-hmm. and I would like to use some form of public transport, right, to get to the campus. And I just want to walk around because it's a beautiful day in Redmond. How do we drive the experiences so that we can tell you, hey, why don't you go to building 99 or building 21, where we have this specific activity at this point in time that would engage you better? Or if you have someone that drives down to or rides down to a meeting in some other building, we say, hey, you're here in this building. Why don't you look at this specific activity that's going on, which is aligned to your interest, right? And this will help make your days better, smarter, wiser, right? So catering these unique preferences for different types of people and giving them the choice of what do you want to do with your time was how we thought of addressing the gap. Because once again, people don't like to be forced, and that's not what we want to do. We want to empower people with the choice of, if they decide to drive, fantastic, we'll support you. If you decide to walk, we'll support you. Okay, if you want to work in an open space with no walls, cool, we'll support you. But ensuring you're connected and you can work from any spot on the campus in a way that suits your requirements is what we're all about.
Yeah. And so you bring up, I think that's a segue into an interesting point. I mean, a city or a community is a massive ecosystem, right? You can do the things, you can control. I mean, maybe Microsoft can control some things outside their own four walls, but you're connected to a community of public transportation, biking, whatever it is, walking, other new residential communities that maybe pop up in the area. How much time did you spend externally trying to inform how the campus would connect to the broader community?
So that's a great question. And, we have an entire team that's dedicated to looking at it. But at a very high level, if I look at the Redmond campus, it's an open campus. You can drive around, you can walk around. There are no restrictions, right? The access is restricted to the building, but you're free to walk around. Now, in that particular case, community is a big part of our lifestyle here because, you have a lot of families that live around the Redmond campus. You have schools around the Redmond campus. So what we tried to do was we didn't try to say experience cannot be limited just to the people that work at Microsoft. We encourage, bring your friends over, bring your family over, why don't you have lunch in our cafeteria, right? That promotes emotional wellness of all the people that work here. So with that aspect, making the experiences open but secure. And I say open but secure is because when someone who's not a Microsoft employee comes to Microsoft, he shouldn't feel overloaded with the amount of security that we have, where he starts to get paranoid, like, oh, they're watching me, or this is going to happen to me. I don't want to set foot in this building again. No. It's being open, it's being inclusive, so that when you come in and you're meeting your friend at Microsoft or your family, you can have coffee, you can sit down, you can relax, you can collaborate, you can talk about what you want. But also we, as the owners of the building and the campus, have a layer of security where we design the space so that you're only supposed to go where you are allowed to go, and in a non-obstructive way. So the moment you step outside those boundaries, we get known, we get alerted. Either your host has to respond or somebody else will come and politely show you some other place of the campus. We also paid a lot of attention to visiting guests. This is our corporate HQ. We have a lot of people, both Microsoft employees and non-Microsoft employees, that fly down, that have meetings, that work, that spend the day here. How do we create an atmosphere where if a person comes down, he or she comes down, and they have a flight at, let's say, 6 p.m., but their meeting ends by 2. Yeah, I'm not going to keep them outside the building and say, go enjoy your time in the woods. No, it's like, sit down, relax. You have access to all the facilities. You have access to a coffee machine. You have access to a cafeteria, right? And book your car, right? We have a shuttle on a lobby system where you can go choose your ride and you can decide to go to the airport when you want to go. So providing that layer of security where we take care of the interests of everyone inside the building or employees and making it welcoming to everybody who's not a Microsoft employee, giving them that warm feeling is what we try to do in terms of driving inclusivity of engaging the community. And community is a big deal for us because whenever we see kids come down and walk around the campus, right? They're future Microsofties. That's how we would like to look at them. And the experience that they get is, wow, this is the company that I want to work for. Look at how cool the space is, right? And, kids are easy to engage. I mean, it's not that difficult, but as you go higher up the spectrum, you start talking about teenagers, the coolness factor starts to change. You start talking about young adults, their perspective starts to change. And that's where we try to cater it to say that if you're a teenager, are you looking for the next biggest thing on Halo? Or if you're a young adult, are you looking at the cultural and moral values Microsoft places on how we drive engagement with the community? So addressing all of these points in the way we make our campus open, inclusive with respect to technology is what we are trying. I mean, it's hard. Okay, I wouldn't say we've done it, but that is where we are headed to.
Right. But trying is the first step, right? I mean, these are all big, massive, complicated things.
Right.
So, one of the things we've been asked to do is be like the innovation consultant, which is odd as a VC. So large developers say, the project we're building, we'll have to think about technology that is yet to be invented. So, because they're so massive, like it's a 15 million square foot project. So KP, you guys know what's going on, like help us, inform us. And one of the things that we've done in those engagements has been kind of a cultural check when they're hiring the architecture team or the landscape team or the construct, is trying to understand, because these are big companies typically, the company is a function of the people. I mean, when you were trying to select the teams and go through that process of who you're going to partner with from a design or construction, how much value did you put into like the person and their cultural outlook around thinking, I hate to use the term thinking differently, but just having a, it's not about cranking out this project like the last 10 projects you did. And of course, budget and schedule given, right? That's a given. That's no longer, that's just expected.
Right.
Did you evaluate like the firms and the teams around how they looked at things and the creative aspects of the project?
Yeah. So that's a fantastic point. And I'll give you a live example from my previous role. So when I used to work with end customers, and when I used to work with end customers, a large part of my responsibility was helping them design and make their building smart, which also means identifying partners that we will work with who we think would fit the needs and requirements that they would have. And the specific case is about a building out of Sharjah that comes to mind. It was a beautiful Zaha Hadid building. And the beauty of that building was it's curved, right? All the walls are curved. So you just can't go there, hit a nail on the wall and hang a screen. It just won't hang. And when we started talking with them, the personification of the building as a sand dune depicting local culture was a huge deal for them. So it's not about bringing in technology, fitting it out with sensors and destroying the look and feel of the sand dunes that so represent the Middle East. It's about understanding how do people flow and work within that building. And if we have to cater for basic technologies, they won't work because they've got these huge high ceilings. And if I have to work with a conventional organization that comes and says, hey, these ceilings are too high, the only way to do facial recognition is to put a pole in the middle of that ceiling so the camera comes within the 5-meter range that you want. Then like, well, hold on, we can't spoil the layout with a pole hanging right there in the middle of the building. Everything gets destroyed. You are destroying the purpose of the building and the physical design. So working with organizations which are open to experiment and take a risk with how design fuses with technology is what we were about. There was one other example where we said, today it's all about robots. Everybody loves robots everywhere. Like they come, they greet you, they shake your hand, they probably sing for you. And in this particular case, how do you drive accuracy of a location in that building with a robot? Now, all this works fine if you're talking about conventional Cree buildings, because you have the prescribed height, you have the prescribed density of either a Wi-Fi mesh or a Bluetooth mesh. But what happens if your ceilings are huge, right? More than the conventional 8 to 12 feet, right? They're higher than that. What happens if you don't want the facade to be destroyed? How do you repurpose your thinking so you can figure out a new way of driving coordinates to the robot so it is seamlessly moving across the building? Does that mean having a higher raised floor? If a higher raised floor, what does that mean to the contractor? Does that mean rather than doing your access points on the ceiling, I'm going to do it on the floor? Does that mean a new antenna design, which would allow all these things to come together? So those are the types of innovative partners that we look for, who are not afraid to take a risk. And that happens a lot for our campus as well today. If you look at our network designs, it is conventionally something not everybody would do. I mean, it's not that they don't know, it's just that they probably will not have the risk appetite to try and to fail. And that's something we do. We believe it needs to be done. Why don't we go ahead, test it, pilot it? If we fail, it's a learning. If we succeed, fantastic. That's something people can replicate on. But there's always a balance, right? I just can't keep failing all the time. I have to succeed sometimes.
Yeah.
So choosing that balance of what do we really want to pilot and test out versus what do we want to experiment on and we're open to failure on is something that we balance very well. And that's a challenge. It's not easy because I do have cost justifications. I do have budget ramifications to go and say, hey, look, I spent this, these are the results. There's never an open checkbook, let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's interesting because our industry is so risk averse. So when you talk about, hey, if we fail, let's learn from it and move on. Half the people on this call are saying, no, if I fail, you're going to sue me and my professional insurance is going up. Like, no, we can't. Like, that's why we fall back to the things we know because they worked, and we're not going to end up in, I used to joke around that our industry is design, build, operate, litigate. That's our life cycle of our industry. And so, I mean, I think it's a cultural thing really to say, no, it's okay if you fail, because we're not wired that way. I mean, I had the fortune of I worked for Frank Gehry for a year, and it was just a very different experience because risk was just not something we talked about.
Right.
We talked more about, no, this is what we have to build we have to do something important. Like everything was important. And doing important things takes risk, right? And I know a lot of people, my colleagues there, they struggled because they came from very traditional firms.
Right.
And they said, oh, well, we can't tell the contractor how to actually build the building. That's means and methods. We'll get sued for that. Whereas Frank was like, no, this is how you're going to do it. I'm going to tell you how you're going to build it. So that's interesting. How, culturally, how deep did you think about organizations? It's one thing about how they interact, but is there a technology readiness that you expect your teams, if an architecture firm comes to you and says, oh, we have rooms full of people drafting on drawing boards, you're probably not excited about that. So how deep do you go into the organization to understand what their operational readiness around technology and, or do you care? Or is it I just want you to design a product. I don't care how you get there.
So operational readiness is actually a vital part of our evaluation criteria. And the reason I say that is we build a building, the building lasts for 20 to 30 years. And I want to drive the most innovative technology in that building. But at the same time, I have to ensure for the first few years, I'm able to maintain it, operate it, secure it, stabilize it. So for me, it's about saying that, I'm happy to go down the innovative path with you if you have proven established ways where you have done the innovation, taken the risk, and you have established it as an operationally sound technology or a platform. Building something that does not work, and when you're talking about a campus as large as ours, failure is a hard option because the moment people fail to experience the outcomes of a service that they thought the service would do, they'll stop using it. And lack of adoption is the biggest failure we would have. So for me, it's about evaluating and saying that how much can you innovate, what types of innovation that you've done, and how can you take that innovation and standardize it so that it can become an operationally sustainable technology that moves out. We're open to refreshing it, and that's what we all do. But I think the critical point for us is building something that can be supported and perform at the levels that you said it would perform is a critical part of the technology that goes in. The last thing I want to do is, tell everybody that, hey, wayfinding across the campus, you can navigate to within a few feet of where you have to get to. And all of a sudden, after 6 months, the wayfinding service stopped because the beacons can't get the firmware that they said they would get. Right. So balancing that and making sure operational readiness is a big deal of it is a critical element for us, because it's like the whole DevOps process, right? You build, you operate, you improve, and that's not there in buildings today, right? So bringing that attitude and that mindset of continuously improving the service in that space is what we're trying to do.
All right, great. For those of y'all that are on, be sure to use the Q&A function if you have any questions, and we'll start kind of interjecting your questions into the conversation. So I know IoT is a big word, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Small acronym, big word.
Mm-hmm.
How are you implementing that? Because the challenge I always have with IoT when I think about it, you have the big guys, right? We have the Siemens and JCIs and all those people, Schneider Electric, all these people that are doing IoT. But to me, it's almost like they're still behind. But there's a lot less risk, right? They're established. They say things like BACnet, and I just cringe, right? And then or anything else. So then you look at that, and then you look at the startups, where we work, and we have all these cool startups doing IoT, but they lose deals just because they're not, it's like no one got fired for hiring IBM. It's like no one got fired for hiring Johnson Controls, right? How have you been able to kind of rationalize bringing startups earlier stage against the true and tried Siemens, JCI, people like that?
That's a great point. And that's something we are doing as well. What we try to do is, established players are critical because they give you the stability of the organization, the company, the technology, and the support that goes into it, right? So if I have to buy something that I know will be supported for the next X years, I'll probably go the larger player because of the risk aversion I have towards buying something that is tried, tested, and true. But at the same time, if I'm talking about specific points of engagement that is going to delight experiences, that's where the smaller players start to fit in. Let's take a classical example. If I'm going to talk about today with something as simple as driving operational efficiency using harmonic signatures of the assets that come in. I mean, it's not a mainstream solution that everybody offers. It's something that you have a small group of startups that try to do, and they say, hey, we'll record the harmonic signatures. Using the harmonic signatures, we'll create a better predictive model than the rule-based model that you have today. And that's interesting. I think, okay, cool. Let us test it. Let us evaluate it. So identifying the unique cases where these startups would fit in, right, where technology does not exist today, is what we would go after. If you look at the second space in terms of, let's take a look at converged networking. Within a building, the biggest challenge that's going to come across is buildings in the past weren't built as data generating powerhouses. They were just built as space. You go live in a building, you sleep in a building, you work in a building. Today, buildings are designed to capture data and to generate terabytes of data, right? You'd see some of the newest smart buildings that come on where they say they generate more than a terabyte of data a day, which is unusual for a building, because conventionally buildings have operational data. Operational data, when you talk about message volumes, are really small messages, right? A few KBs probably. Now, when you start talking about navigation, indoor navigation, turn by turn, blue dot navigation, you start talking about image recognition, you start talking about people counting. This is where the data starts to explode. Now, the old conventional rule is I collect everything, I store everything, but that's a huge burden as an owner. That's a huge burden for me of an operational cost to capture that data, to store that data. But if a startup comes in and says that, hey, you know what, I want to talk to you about how I can help you optimize your port distribution across the building. So rather than having 100,000 ports for 100,000 devices, I can help converge that to a single device that will help feed data in and out from your building and help you secure it much better, much faster than conventional technologies. This is an area the bigger boys won't look at, because for them, it's about more ports, more data, more money. That's where the startups come in and say, hey, would you be open to this? And right, so driving those innovative sparks of pain points that we have, which can't be addressed today with conventional technology, is where we engage startups on. And we say, hey, let's go ahead and take a look at it. Even something as basic, plug load monitoring. Everybody knows plug load monitoring. There's no rocket science to it. But if I have to drive plug load monitoring to the level of a workstation, right? To be able to use a comparative analysis in terms of why is workstation A higher than workstation B without having to redo my circuit design and spend millions of dollars on it, okay, is the innovative spark that we would then look for and say, wow, you could do this just by plugging it into a socket and giving me live reading as to how it's being consumed. So add-on areas that the bigger boys can't address because they are so risk averse, okay, is what will drive us towards that innovative spark. If someone comes and says, I'm going to give you a parking solution, I'm like, man, there are hundreds of parking solutions out there. What in your parking solution is unique? If they say that I'll help optimize the infrastructure that you're going to put into a parking garage, I will help drive a better location tracing of the parking garage, or I will ensure that I'll have seamless integrated access all the way from the garage to the meeting room in one go. So those ideas and experiences is what I look at in terms of identifying startups.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I have this rule on these talks: for the first 30 minutes, we're not allowed to talk about COVID. But someone just asked a question, and we're over the 30-minute mark. Because otherwise, every webinar becomes about that. But the question was, in the new world of C19 and people working from home and kind of the connected building concepts, like how are you looking at that? I mean, I know you'd said it earlier, you're not going back on campus, or I think kind of until October. And so to expand on that a little bit, how is that getting integrated? Like we're looking at kind of social distancing tools, just all that monitoring, check-in, check-out, just, contact tracing. And
right.
And there's obviously a ton of things coming out all of a sudden. And we're investing in a few of them because we think there will be some aspect to C19 that lingers. Our theory is post 9/11, we still have TSA, right? We're still taking our shoes off. We're maybe not going through all the things we did back then, but we're still taking our shoes off. So there is some remnant effect of policy and procedural stuff. So how have you been replanning it? I mean, is the reopening, is that planning and plotting happening today, and how are you thinking about it?
So there is a dedicated COVID response team at Microsoft, right? And again, I probably can't talk to what they're specifically doing because that's their charter. But from an experience perspective, in terms of what we are seeing and what we think is going to influence the services that we offer, I can talk about that, right? And when we look at it, so the way I look at it is Microsoft operates globally across multiple locations. Singapore is home for me. I'm from Singapore. And when you look at how things are done in Singapore versus how they happen here in the US, culturally, it's very different. Singapore went through SARS. And when they went through SARS, the whole thing with temperature scanning is people don't mind, right? It's an inconvenience, yes, but people don't mind. Right. They're more open to it. Singapore also implemented contact tracing that they're using to help manage the situation that they have. Now, culturally, the offices that we operate in and the experiences that we have will vary. So for example, if I have to do integrated scanning of people within the buildings on the US, it's much harder. Probably the answer will be no. But doing that in a country outside of the US, it's probably much easier because culturally, people are more adaptable to it. Right. One key thing that we see is in terms of the next generation of experiences, people need more space. If people need more space, that typically means I can't build bigger buildings, so I would like to, but for me, it's driving more effective utilization of bigger spaces. So I'm happy to give you more space, but can I make that space more effective for a larger bunch of people that come and go through that space? So we spoke a lot about physical security and cybersecurity, but today we're now talking about environmental security as well. If I'm going to create that space for you, how do I ensure the ambience of the environment in that space is secure? How do I treat the air better? How do I ensure that, physically in terms of what you inhale, the quality of air and the stuff that goes through it is safer, cleaner, better than what it was before COVID? And the classic example that we give is if you look at Singapore, you have haze that comes in. If haze sets in, you've got to put in additional filters. The additional filters is going to cost a little more pull on your AHUs because take more power to process the air. But it's a worthy trade-off to ensure quality of air inside buildings are much better than quality of air outside. In the post-COVID world, I think the angle that we're looking at is how do we ensure the environment in the building is much more safer, healthier, and more sanitized compared to what we would do, right? The air that we breathe was, I mean, as long as it's clean, people don't care because, you know, you basically inhale everything. Now, the next part of that is going to be a lot of contactless activities. What does that mean? Do I have to touch a building 100 times to get from the parking lot into my meeting room? Why? Should I not automate the way the doors open, the way the navigation happens, other than touching my own personal device, which is my phone?
Right.
Okay, and using that to navigate. Why do I have to touch every spot on a building? Do I have to open a door myself? Do I have to touch an elevator myself? It's not, there used to be conveniences before, right? Elevators now come with destination control systems. I go there, it sees my face, it says you can only go to building A or B. Mm-hmm. But bringing that in to drive a lot less friction across how you access a building, get to your space, consume that space, okay, is what we're trying to look at as well. Because ultimately it's about giving everybody, not just like an individual person, a group of people, the space and distance they need to consume the services that they want, so they don't feel that, hey, you know, they're touching something that they really don't have to touch. And that's something we're trying to now look at, even as something as simple as occupancy. We talk about occupancy all the time. But if a person comes and, okay, especially in the world of hot desking, if a person comes and uses a desk and they leave for 2 hours, right? How do you ensure that desk is clean and sanitized so when the next person comes on and uses it, he doesn't have to be afraid of anything? Right. So these elements, bringing that element in and ensuring that this becomes a part of how technology is used to create that safe physical environment is what we're looking at to enhance the experiences. Won't change, but they'll be enhanced to make them more safer.
Yeah. How do you think that scales down? I mean, you guys are Microsoft, right? You're, how do I, if I'm living in an apartment complex where the owner has 5 properties,
right?
How do you see that scaling down? Because I think, you know, what I would say is this is all trauma for all of us. You know, it's all deep emotional trauma for all of us.
Right.
That coming out of this, we'll carry with us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't care whether I'm on Microsoft's campus or in my apartment, and my apartment owner only has 5 buildings and doesn't have the resources.
Right.
I need to know, like, how do you think technology? I mean, we see it as technology. It's an opportunity for technology, right? Do it cheaper,
Correct.
better, faster is technology.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you see within your circle of peers and all, or is there conversations about how this scales down and like what your standard at Microsoft might be a notch above someone else? Like we've had conversations with Starbucks. And Starbucks is telling us, we will set the standard, but do you expect the mom and pop coffee shop to operate at that standard? Absolutely not. Right? They can't afford to, the risk isn't there, et cetera. Do you see like how this stuff is going to start scaling down in terms of compliance and reporting and contactless stuff?
I think I definitely see that. And even amongst my peers in the industry, we've had these discussions before. And the question always comes down to saying that, hey, you know, you're Microsoft, you can do that because that's how big you are. Right. And one of the key things that we do in every service that we design is how do we create it so that this can be replicated by any one of our partners out there in the ecosystem. The last thing I want to do is to build a bespoke beast that no one can copy, right? That's not what we're all about. So that does mean, I mean, it puts a lot of constraints in terms of how I'm going to design the service, how I'm going to productize that service, and what components that go into it. But it's a worthy effort because ultimately for us, our employees go everywhere, right? I mean, they only don't work in the Microsoft campus. Right. We visit customers, we visit family, we go to airports, right? You know, you have Microsoft guys that travel all the time. We have global offices as well. So for us, it's about how do we make the services that we create so easy to replicate and so easy to consume that a mom and shop office provider who is also a Microsoft customer who probably is using Teams today have that service in that apartment block or in that store. So when people come in, they can be sure that it's a safe, secure environment to carry out their activities. I mean, it's like the credit card, right? When it came out, nobody wanted to use it, but today without credit card, life is impossible. That's what is going to be in the post-COVID world. How do we drive that level of engagement and experience to make it completely uniform for everyone?
Yeah. Do you see what, like the innovation you're doing to serve yourself, right? In many ways, you've built innovation for a market of one for Microsoft, right? You're doing these things. Do you see a commercialization effort? I mean, the one thing I look at with COVID, all of a sudden people are
Uh-huh.
realizing we're all very well aware about physical surroundings. We're all very well aware, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's put a spotlight to my
Uh-huh.
opening statement, like we're still building things of high permanence, and now everybody
Right.
is paying attention to us.
Uh-huh.
Do you see a path where you'd commercialize either best practices or technology? Like, is that something you're even looking at?
Oh yeah. So on the project, Microsoft is huge, and we have multiple stakeholders. Like I said, our real estate organization is chartered with driving the campus modernization and transformation, but that also means we have multiple engineering groups that are part of the effort as well. Because there are a lot of things that are unique to the industry that we understand, but that is not, and like you clearly said, KP, I think at the start when you made that comment that real estate is not something that is at the cusp of cutting edge technology. It's slow, it takes time to get into it. So we are working very closely with our engineering groups as well, right, where they identify bits and pieces and say, what, we have to commercialize it. What does making this into a product actually entail? Right? How do we replicate it? So, okay, any supplier partner could consume it. So it's a big part of our design. And that's why our design, okay, and I generally tell people this, okay, it's a lot harder for me because I'm not only designing experiences for Microsoft, okay, I'm designing experiences that anybody could take it, consume it, customize it for themselves. And that's what we're all about, democratizing the experiences that you want to roll out. So it's a big part of our design element.
Great. That's great to hear, right? I mean, I think it does take, this is all hard, right? I mean,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
it's easy to say innovation. It's harder to do innovation, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
With budget constraints and time constraints, it's even harder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Software companies can decide, it hurts them if they release 2 days late, but in real estate, you end up in that litigate phase. Right. So someone said, and it's interesting, someone brought up about Airbnb and how they're having to find like cleaning companies that provide kind of the Airbnb compliance. So, I mean, I think the ripple effect to this is downstream. Like it's not just you, it's your vendors, it's your vendors' vendors.
Mm-hmm.
There's an entire supply chain that has to start being compliant. And it reminds me of some of my work in the late 90s around green chain and, oh, well, that's great. Your door is LEED, but it turns out the origin of the wood was from a rainforest. So, that kind of thing. So, so I think it's interesting how like, it's going to have similar aspects, right? It's not just about what you do. It's about your janitorial service and then the suppliers. Have you contemplated any of that? Like how to wrap that in? I mean, is that going to be something that's more you, or is that more COVID response team, or?
So a bit of both, right? And I think within Microsoft, sustainability is a core component for us. And in fact, you'll see that we even talk about embodied carbon in terms of how we are building the campus, right? To ensure that it doesn't, we are true to what we are doing. Now, if I take that from a supplier's perspective with respect to technology, we try to look at it to say that what are the impacts and practices that, let's take a very simple example, worker safety, right? We talk about worker safety all the time with respect to running cognition services so we can identify workers are safe, happy, and secure. Now, we wouldn't generally work with someone who's got very poor worker safety because they don't use that technology for themselves, right? And they don't inculcate these practices within the work environment that they work in, because when our teams collaborate, we believe it should be fair and equal for all. So identifying the ecosystem, the work that they've done, and the practices that they have put into place is a big part of our evaluation criteria. If we find someone has a very unsafe workplace, but they come and talk to us about safe, healthy workplaces and the air that you would have, like, hold on, what about all the people that work for you? Are they not as good as us, right? Everybody is the same, right? So that becomes a big part of our evaluation criteria as well. The other thing that we also look at is in terms of sustainability of the technology. It is great to have stability and float in terms of who's backing you, what type of investments you have, and how you can last as an organization. But at the same time, we also want to ensure that the idea that you bring through is something that people actually will benefit from, right? I can give everybody, beautiful diamond-crusted phones, but what's the point if that phone doesn't work, right? Or what's the point if I don't have cell phone coverage in the space that I'm working in, right? So okay, identifying it from that perspective and seeing how they get supported, implemented, operated, and consumed, and how they're using it for themselves is what we look at very, very closely.
Who are you seeing? We haven't talked much about like construction phase. And on any given day, I feel like the contractors are innovating faster than anyone. Until I find an engineer that's doing something even more fantastic. But how are you working with your contractors, and how, like, you know, a little bit of, you're buying the end product, right? You're working to get something designed and you're buying the end product. But how they get there, a lot of owners basically opt out of that. Like,
yes,
I don't care how you do it. Here's what I expect. Have you dug into like understanding what their product, like have you gotten into their business, so to speak?
We have. We definitely have. And the way we classified our transformation is the very first phase that we did was a shell and core phase. And, you know, I call it shell and core phase. For us, I mean, it means a lot different for them, is because I said, when you are bringing the building up, the building needs to be smart from the ground up. Okay, I don't want to build the shell and core and then go around, right, and start digging holes and start laying up. No. As you raise the building from the ground up, what practices do we have to do so the building is catered to be smart? And that's where we start sitting down with our GCs, our MEP guys, our BOD folks, and say, okay, guys, what needs to change? What practices needs to happen? And that's where we start getting into their territory, where they say, hold on. Are you telling us how to do our work? I said, no, we're not. We're just asking you to enhance it so we all can benefit from the outcome of that work. The one key thing that we did was enhancing the basis of design. We then said that, hey, let's take the BOD, let's try to identify in the BOD what elements of what digital transformation means, right? And like I said, innovation is a very abused word. Okay, everybody says it, but the moment you go and ask them, can you tell me what innovation you actually did? They're like, well, you know, I put a sensor here that collects this data. I'm like, no, that's not innovation, right? And that's where we sat down with the BOD guys and we said, okay, let us write the basis of design where we can actually call out digital transformation initiatives. So downstream, when somebody else has to read it and say, oh, okay, this is what they mean with respect to digital transformation for the parking lot. This is what they mean for digital transformation with respect to camera placement, or this is what it means for structured cabling, right? Something as simple as saying that what type of access path should I use for the cable, and why that path matters is where we try to get into to influence the BOD. And that has really benefited us a lot, because if I look at something as simple as POE, and there are a lot of cases there where they've done POE lighting, where they've had buildings that have complete DC power, phenomenal cases, right? I'll probably say pioneers in our industry today. And how do I get the message of implementing a distributed POE network down to my MEP guys, down to my lighting consultant, down to my GCs, and the city as well, because you have to go and get it permitted, otherwise you can't roll it out to a building, right? And that's where to me positive friction occurs. I say positive friction is because they are learning, they have to change the way they conventionally do it. We learn their business and their challenges, and they learn what we want to do, right? And that in turn influences the way the building gets constructed. So it's not easy. I mean, change is never easy, but I think it's been extremely positive the way we engage with our GCs, and we're driving that discussion because they see the benefits as well.
Yeah, it's interesting when we talk about getting into people's business. One of our limited partners is a large architectural firm, and the board was giving me the story how they had a client that was a big tech company, and they wanted them to do 2-week sprints,
right,
and commit the design every 2 weeks, like upload the design every 2 weeks so we can take a look at it.
Right.
And they were like, absolutely not. Like, we're not doing that. You're like, you don't want to see how the sausage is made, basically, is what they said. Right. And they said it became a huge sticking point because we hired your firm because you talked about how innovative you are.
Right.
This is how we're used to working. Right. I don't see why it's a problem. And part of that was like this transparency thing. Like, well, no, like we commit code every 2 weeks and it's not perfect. Right. And that's the point, right? We're learning together. And it was funny. They were just sharing this story, and I thought it was fascinating, right? Like the intersection of the tech guys not understanding, the tech company not understanding why they wouldn't do that. and the architect's just blowing up their mind, right? Like, what do you
Right.
mean? So I think, I mean, it's interesting, but it's also like, why not? You know?
Yeah.
But
The reason I laugh is, I think that's the divide between commercial real estate and technology. And we always joke, right? And my role is sitting on two sides of the fence, where we joke and says, if we have to break a building down every 2 weeks and rebuild it, the building will never get done, right? You would need a single brick in place. But at the same time, if you don't adapt to design practices, you won't have the younger generation of people coming and using that space, right? So both of us are at a loss of words. I can't build an antique building when no one wants to get into, because they think, oh my God, this is so old school, right? It's so dark, it's so woody, it's not open. That's why we try to draw a balance, right? And we come together to say, probably not every 2 weeks, but let's identify the phases that can go through our sprints. And I think a big part, which I think the technology folks tend to miss out, is a building is a system of systems. It's got 30, 40, or even more systems that go into a building. All of them are technology. Some of these systems have longer lead times, surely because of the size and volume of those systems, right? It's not a piece of software that I refresh. If I have to make a chiller for a capacity, I've got to order that chiller. It's a massive chiller that goes into a building, right? And the same thing would apply for fan coil units, for AHUs, and BMSs, right? I can't keep swapping in and swapping out a BMS every day. And what I tell them is, if you do your software project and you follow naming conventions, no matter what you do, you stick with those naming conventions, because that's how any developer can read your code, enhance it, update it. The same thing applies for a building. All of these assets, all these components have naming conventions, have standards. If we keep changing them every 2 weeks, the building never gets done, just like your code won't get done. Right? And that's where I draw parallels to them and says, now do you see why we can't break walls every 2 weeks and rebuild it? Right? But it's a learning,
you can't refactor the building. There's no refactoring of the building.
There's no refactoring of the building, yes.
So we had a question about incorporating climate resilience and sustainability in the design and construction process. I mean, I'm assuming clearly, given the, and I'm also super interested in understanding what happens to these kind of commitments that were made in January at Davos and post Davos around climate change, because unfortunately there is a finite amount of money, contrary to popular belief. And if people are allocating funds to dealing with COVID and economic resilience,
right.
So are there been specific areas, you talked about some of the things with carbon, but are there specific threads or trends you're focused on when it comes to incorporating kind of sustainability in design and construction?
So there is, and actually, if you go down to our project site, you'll see a whole article that's been published by our sustainability leads on embodied carbon in construction materials, how we calculate that, how we drive that. So sustainability is at our heart, right? We wouldn't do anything that's non-sustainable. We wouldn't do anything that's harmful to the planet, knowingly, right? There may be things that happen, but as a whole, we are extremely committed to it. I think all our senior leadership has spoken about it, and that's something that we stick to. Specifically for the experiences, and that I can talk about, is when we talk about experience design and infrastructure design within buildings, we try to choose experiences that are going to be positive influencers on how we affect the environment. For example, once again, this comes back to culture, and you'll notice a lot of the experiences that I've actually spoken about is very culturally oriented. It may not be the same if I go down to Singapore or Hyderabad compared to Redmond, or even in Europe. So here, if you talk about how do I create an atmosphere where I can help people minimize driving their individual cars and get into ride sharing, or using our connector frameworks, right? How do I motivate them to do that? If they do decide to drive their car, because people have choice, and they come onto the campus, how do I get them to park their car and to use the shuttles that we have across the campus to take you from A to B, right? So not generally, so you're sharing your rides, you're not, burning as much as fossil fuels as you would do. So inculcating these positive habits as, reinforcements to positive behaviors is what we're looking at. The other thing is, those who've come to Redmond, you see the weather can be phenomenally beautiful at times, but at other times, not so much. Using okay, environmental influences to say that, hey, you know, it's a beautiful day. Why don't you decide to go out and walk from building A to B? Because you can just okay, enjoy the atmosphere, the pleasantness, the temperature is just great. And taking that to food, right? If we apply that to food as well, how do we have sustainable sourcing practices so we can encourage people to eat food that is sustainable, local, healthy? Now, it's all about choice, right? And there's no such thing as we are going to mandate it. But positive behavioral influences that would enable them to see the impact that they are, okay, making is something that we would like to drive.
All right, great. So we're about out of time. Is there any parting thoughts you have to share with, I would say, what's mostly is design, construction, real estate, and a bunch of startups too that are all going to try to. Your LinkedIn is already full, if not already. So if my startup community is doing what they're supposed to do, they're already hitting you up on LinkedIn trying to sell you something. But otherwise they wouldn't be in my community. But any other parting thoughts before we wrap up?
I think for me, it's the final parting thought that I would say is space is limited, but experience in that space is unlimited. So identifying the experiences you want to provide in that space and transform that space is what it's all about.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I know you're swamped, got a lot going on, and I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of share, because I think it's a great project. And like I said, I'm sure your LinkedIn box is already full if it's, but thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, KP. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Take care.